Every morning at exactly 4 o'clock, Isabella Ruiz unlocked the front door of Sweet Blessings Bakery, breathing in the familiar comfort of flour, sugar, and rising bread that had filled this small shop for the past 6 years. She loved these quiet early hours before the city fully woke, the gentle rhythm of mixing, baking, and decorating that made her feel like she was creating something meaningful with her own 2 hands. Isabella was 29 years old, warm and full-figured, with kind brown eyes and dark curls she usually kept tied back beneath a simple bandana while she worked. Customers often said her bakery felt like stepping into a hug, warm light, comforting smells, and Isabella's genuine smile greeting everyone who walked through the door regardless of how busy the morning rush became. She had built this bakery from nothing after her mother passed away, using the small inheritance to finally pursue the dream they had shared together for years. Every recipe carried a piece of her mother's memory, and Isabella poured that love into everything she created, believing firmly that good food made with genuine care could bring comfort even during life's most difficult moments. It was on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, nearly 6 months ago now, when Isabella first noticed a man who would eventually change everything she thought she understood about her quiet, predictable life. He walked into her bakery at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon, tall and imposing, wearing an expensive dark suit that seemed entirely out of place among her modest shop's simple wooden tables and cheerful floral curtains. His presence immediately commanded attention. Sharp features, dark eyes carrying an intensity that made Isabella's usual friendly greeting catch slightly in her throat. "What can I get for you?" she asked, offering her warmest smile despite the unexpected nervousness his imposing presence triggered. "1 slice of strawberry cream cake," he said, his voice deep and carrying quiet authority. "To go, please." Isabella prepared his order, curious despite herself about this mysterious, clearly wealthy stranger visiting her modest neighborhood bakery. He paid in cash, left a generous tip without comment, and departed without further conversation, leaving Isabella with lingering curiosity about the sadness she glimpsed briefly behind his controlled expression. The following day, at exactly 3:15 again, he returned. Same order, same quiet, controlled demeanor, same brief flash of something deeply sad behind his otherwise carefully guarded eyes. He left just as quickly as he'd arrived, cash payment, generous tip, minimal conversation beyond his simple order. By the end of that first week, Isabella had begun anticipating his daily visit, genuine curiosity building steadily about this mysterious man's unwavering routine. Every single day, exactly 3:15, 1 slice of strawberry cream cake. Always to go, never staying to eat it in her cozy shop, despite the comfortable seating she'd arranged specifically to encourage customers to linger. "You have a very loyal customer," her assistant baker, Rosa, commented one afternoon, watching the mysterious man depart with his daily purchase. 6 days a week, same time, same order, never varies. "I've noticed," Isabella admitted, watching through her front window as he climbed into a sleek black car waiting outside, driven by another serious-looking man who nodded respectfully as his boss settled into the back seat. "Do you know who he is?" Rosa asked, lowering her voice slightly despite the shop being otherwise empty. Isabella shook her head. "He's never introduced himself, just orders his cake and leaves." "I heard someone mention his name once," Rosa said carefully. "Antonio Reyes. My cousin works security downtown. Mentioned that name comes up sometimes, connected to some serious business. If you understand what I mean." Isabella felt a chill of unease at this information, though her curiosity about the sadness she consistently glimpsed in his expression remained stubbornly present despite any reasonable caution his mentioned reputation might warrant. Over the following weeks, Isabella found herself increasingly curious about Antonio's unwavering daily routine. Why the same cake every single day, without variation, without ever staying to enjoy it in her shop? Where did he go immediately afterward, carrying that single slice with such careful, deliberate attention? She told herself repeatedly that his business, whatever it truly involved, was none of her concern. She had built a peaceful, predictable life for herself after years of difficulty following her mother's death, and getting entangled with someone potentially connected to dangerous criminal activity seemed like precisely the kind of complication she should actively avoid. Yet the persistent sadness behind his carefully controlled expression continued troubling her deeply, an ache of genuine sympathy building steadily despite her reasonable caution about his mysterious circumstances. One particular Tuesday evening, nearly 6 months after his very first visit, Isabella found herself unable to simply let him leave with his usual quiet, unexplained departure. Closing her shop slightly early, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She followed him, keeping careful distance behind his sleek black car as she drove her modest older sedan through increasingly unfamiliar streets. Isabella's heart pounded with a combination of nervous anticipation and genuine uncertainty about what she might discover, or whether this decision represented significant, unwise overstepping into circumstances that truly weren't any of her business. The black car eventually turned into the parking structure of St. Mary's Medical Center, one of the city's largest hospitals. Isabella parked several spaces away, watching as Antonio exited his vehicle, the cake box held with unusual careful tenderness as he walked purposefully toward the hospital's main entrance. Isabella sat in her car for a long moment, genuine uncertainty warring with her overwhelming curiosity about exactly what circumstances brought this powerful, dangerous man to a hospital every single day, cake carefully in hand. Finally, taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car and followed him inside, unaware that she was about to discover something that would break her heart completely and change the entire trajectory of both their lives forever. Isabella followed a careful distance behind Antonio as he navigated the hospital's quiet corridors with obvious familiarity, clearly having walked this exact path countless times before. He moved past the main nurse's station with only a brief gnawed exchange with the staff, people who apparently recognized him well enough not to require explanation or identification. She hesitated near the elevator, watching him press the button for 4th floor, uncertain whether following him further represented genuine concern or unwelcome intrusion into circumstances that clearly weren't meant for outside observation. But something about the careful, tender way he held that simple cake box, so different from his otherwise controlled, intimidating demeanor, propelled her forward despite her uncertainty. She caught the next elevator, following the same 4th floor route he had taken, finding herself in a quiet hospital wing with soft lighting and a peaceful, almost reverent atmosphere entirely different from the chaotic energy she associated with typical hospital floors. A small sign near the nurse's station read, "Pediatric Long-Term Care." Isabella's stomach tightened with sudden, dreadful understanding as she processed the implication of the specific unit. She spotted Antonio through a partially open door near the end of the hallway and moved closer, her heart pounding with a complicated mixture of guilt over her intrusion and overwhelming curiosity about what she was about to witness. Inside the room, a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, lay motionless in a hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment, her small chest rising and falling with the assistance of a ventilator. Dark curls framed her peaceful, unmoving face, and stuffed animals lined the shelf around her bed, gifts clearly meant to bring comfort to a child who showed no sign of being able to appreciate them. Antonio sat carefully in the chair beside her bed, opening the cake box with the same careful tenderness Isabella had witnessed throughout his journey to reach this room. He lifted the strawberry cream cake slightly, allowing its sweet scent to drift through the quiet room. "I brought your favorite today, Mija," he said softly, his deep voice carrying none of the controlled authority Isabella had witnessed in her bakery, only raw, aching tenderness. "Strawberry cream, just like you always ask for on your birthday." Isabella stood frozen in the hallway, tears immediately filling her eyes as she processed the devastating scene unfolding before her. This powerful, intimidating man, someone rumored to be connected to dangerous criminal activity, sat here every single day, bringing his comatose daughter's favorite cake in the desperate hope its familiar scent might somehow reach her, might somehow bring her back from wherever her consciousness had retreated to following whatever tragedy had brought her to this quiet, heartbreaking room. "The doctors say you might be able to smell things even now," Antonio continued softly, setting the cake carefully on the small table beside her bed, close enough that its sweet scent would fill the immediate air around his daughter's peaceful, unmoving face. "I don't know if that's true, but I have to believe it. I have to believe some part of you is still in there, still able to sense that Papa hasn't left you, that Papa comes every single day." Isabella pressed her hand against her mouth, struggling to contain the overwhelming emotion building in her chest as she witnessed this devastating, private moment of a father's desperate, persistent hope. A nurse passing through the hallway noticed Isabella's tearful expression and paused beside her. "Are you family?" she asked gently. Isabella shook her head quickly, embarrassed at having been discovered in her unintentional intrusion. "No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be here. I own the bakery where he buys that cake every day. I was curious, and I followed him, and now I feel terrible for intruding on something so private." The nurse's expression softened with understanding rather than judgment. "Mr. Reyes comes every single day," she said quietly. "Rain or shine, no matter what business demands his time elsewhere. Sophia has been in the state for nearly a year now, since the car accident." "What happened?" Isabella asked softly, though she immediately worried the question overstepped appropriate boundaries. The nurse glanced back toward the room before answering carefully. "From what I understand, it was connected to his business dealings somehow, rivals targeting him, and Sophia was caught in the crossfire during an attack meant for her father. She's been in this coma ever since, and the doctors honestly aren't certain if she'll ever wake up." Isabella felt her heart break further at this information, understanding now the profound guilt that must accompany Antonio's daily vigil, knowing his dangerous world had directly caused his daughter's devastating condition. "He blames himself entirely," the nurse continued softly. "Won't hear otherwise from anyone who tries to comfort him. Comes every single day like clockwork, brings her favorite cake, talks to her for exactly 1 hour before he has to leave for whatever business demands his attention, then returns the following day to do it all again." Isabella watched through the partially open door as Antonio continued speaking softly to his unresponsive daughter, sharing small details about his day. Gentle reminders of happy memories they'd shared together before the accident that had stolen her consciousness away so completely. She knew, with sudden absolute certainty, that she needed to leave before he discovered her intrusive presence, understanding that this profound, private moment of grief and hope deserved privacy rather than an uninvited audience, regardless of her genuine sympathy. She turned to leave, but her movement caught Antonio's attention through the partially open door. He looked up sharply, controlled alertness immediately replacing his earlier tender vulnerability as he registered an unexpected presence outside his daughter's room. Their eyes met across the hallway, and Isabella watched as recognition dawned across his features, followed immediately by something like genuine alarm and embarrassment at having been discovered during such a private, vulnerable moment. "Isabella," he said, standing quickly, his controlled composure returning rapidly despite the obvious surprise evident in his expression. "I'm so sorry," Isabella said immediately, genuine mortification evident in her voice. "I shouldn't have followed you. I was curious about your daily visits, and I made a terrible decision to intrude on something so private. I'll leave immediately." Antonio studied her carefully for a long, tense moment, various emotions crossing his expression as he processed her presence and apparent understanding of his private circumstances. Finally, something in his controlled demeanor softened slightly. "You don't need to apologize," he said quietly, glancing back toward his daughter's peaceful, unmoving face. "I suppose I've wondered, sometimes, what you might think if you knew where that cake actually went every day." "I think," Isabella said carefully, genuine emotion evident in her voice, "that you're an incredibly devoted father, and I'm deeply sorry for whatever happened to bring your daughter to this place." Something shifted visibly in Antonio's expression at her words, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through his usually controlled exterior. "Would you like to meet her?" he asked unexpectedly. "Sophia, she can't respond, but the doctors say she might still be able to hear." Isabella felt fresh tears building at his unexpected, vulnerable invitation. "I would be honored," she said softly. Isabella stepped carefully into Sophia's room, her heart aching at the sight of the peaceful, unmoving child up close. Antonio guided her toward the bedside chair he'd been occupying, watching with careful attention as Isabella gently took Sophia's small, still hand in her own. "Hello, Sophia," Isabella said softly, her voice carrying genuine warmth despite the tears still threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I'm Isabella. I make the cake your papa brings you every day." Antonio watched this interaction with an expression Isabella couldn't quite identify, something between grief and unexpected gratitude at witnessing someone else extend genuine kindness toward his daughter. "She loved coming to bakeries," Antonio said quietly, settling into a second chair Isabella hadn't noticed near the window. Before the accident, we used to visit different bakeries around the city together on weekends, trying new pastries, letting her pick whatever caught her attention. That sounds like a wonderful tradition, Isabella said softly. It was, Antonio agreed, genuine warmth briefly softening his controlled expression before something heavier settled back over his features. The strawberry cream cake was always her favorite, no matter how many other options we tried. Something about that specific combination. She said the strawberries tasted like summer. Isabella smiled gently at this detail, feeling herself drawn further into genuine, tender emotion Antonio displayed when speaking about his daughter, so different from the controlled, intimidating persona she'd witnessed during his brief daily visits to her bakery. "May I ask what happened?" Isabella said carefully, uncertain if the question overstepped appropriate boundaries, given how recently they'd properly met. Antonio was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening visibly as he considered how much to share. "My business," he said finally, his voice carrying genuine anguish beneath his controlled surface, "involves considerable danger. Rivals, enemies, the kind of world where violence sometimes reaches people who have absolutely nothing to do with the actual conflicts driving it." "The nurse mentioned something about an attack," Isabella said gently. Antonio's expression turned genuinely pained. "A rival organization attempted an assassination against me nearly a year ago. Sophia was with me that day. Something I promised myself would never happen given the obvious risks of my world. But it was her birthday, and she'd begged to accompany me on a simple errand beforehand." He paused, visible guilt evident in every line of his tense posture. "The attack came without warning. I survived without serious injury. Sophia wasn't as fortunate." "I'm so sorry," Isabella said softly, genuine sympathy evident in her voice. "It's my fault entirely," Antonio said, his controlled composure cracking slightly to reveal raw, persistent guilt beneath. "I chose this dangerous life. I chose to bring my daughter into circumstances where such violence remained a constant possibility. Whatever consequences followed from that choice belong entirely to me." Isabella considered his words carefully, genuine sympathy warring with her instinct to offer some kind of comfort against guilt that seemed to consume him entirely over the past year. "You couldn't have predicted that specific attack," she said gently. "Guilt over circumstances beyond your direct control doesn't serve Sophia's recovery or your own well-being." "Perhaps not," Antonio acknowledged, though his tone suggested he hadn't genuinely accepted her gentle reassurance. "But it doesn't change the reality of what happened or my responsibility for choosing this dangerous life in the first place." They sat together for a while longer, the conversation gradually shifting toward gentler territory, memories of Sophia before the accident, small details about her personality and interests that painted a vivid picture of the vibrant child now trapped in unresponsive stillness. When visiting hours eventually concluded, Antonio walked Isabella back toward the hospital's main entrance, an unspoken understanding developing between them despite the relatively brief duration of their genuine acquaintance. "Thank you for today," Antonio said quietly as they reached the parking structure. "For your kindness toward Sophia, and for understanding rather than judging what you witness." "I'm glad I followed you," Isabella admitted honestly, "even though I feel guilty about the intrusive way I discovered your circumstances." "Perhaps," Antonio said carefully, something almost hopeful evident in his controlled expression, "you might consider visiting again sometime?" Sophia seemed to respond, or at least I imagine she did, to your presence today. Isabella felt genuine warmth at his tentative invitation. "I would like that," she said sincerely. Over the following weeks, Isabella began joining Antonio's daily hospital visits several times each week, always bringing fresh cake from her bakery, sitting quietly beside him as he maintained his devoted vigil over his unresponsive daughter. Their conversations gradually deepened beyond simple discussions about Sophia, extending into more personal territory about their individual lives, struggles, and hopes. Isabella learned about Antonio's difficult childhood, inheriting leadership of his organization at a young age following his own father's violent death, the crushing weight of responsibility that came with maintaining power in such a dangerous world. Antonio learned about Isabella's mother's death, the bakery she built as a tribute to their shared dream, the quiet, careful life she constructed afterward. "You've built something beautiful," Antonio observed one evening, as they sat together in Sophia's room during a particularly peaceful visit. Something genuine and lasting, created from genuine love rather than obligation or fear. "I try," Isabella said softly, "though I sometimes wonder if I've hidden behind that bakery too completely, avoiding genuine risk or vulnerability since my mother passed away." "There's nothing wrong with finding safety after significant loss," Antonio said, something genuine and understanding evident in his voice. "Perhaps," Isabella acknowledged, "though lately I've found myself considering whether genuine connection, genuine risk, might actually be worth pursuing again." Their eyes met across Sophia's peaceful, unresponsive form, something unspoken but increasingly undeniable passing between them despite the complicated, difficult circumstances surrounding their developing connection. Meanwhile, within Antonio's organization, his prolonged emotional distraction and frequent absences had begun attracting notice from rivals who had long awaited exactly this kind of perceived vulnerability. Whispers began circulating through the city's criminal underworld about Antonio's daily hospital visits, his apparent emotional preoccupation with his daughter's condition creating an opening that ambitious rivals seemed increasingly eager to exploit. Antonio's second-in-command, a loyal but increasingly concerned man named Raphael, approached him one evening after Isabella had departed from their usual visit. "Sir," Raphael said carefully, "I need to discuss something concerning. There's been increased activity from the Salazar organization, testing our territorial boundaries in ways they haven't attempted since before Sophia's accident." Antonio's expression hardened immediately, his earlier gentleness with Isabella replaced by the controlled, calculating authority that had built and maintained his dangerous empire. "What kind of activity?" "Small incursions initially," Raphael explained, "testing our response, our attention to detail. But my sources suggest they're planning something more significant, believing your extended distraction over Sophia's condition represents genuine, exploitable weakness." Antonio felt a familiar, cold determination settling over him. The protective instincts that had once made him one of the most respected and feared leaders in the city's criminal underworld reasserted themselves despite his profound personal grief. "They believe wrong," Antonio said firmly. "Increase security around the hospital immediately. If the Salazar organization has noticed my daily visits here, I won't risk them attempting anything that might endanger Sophia further or Isabella, given her increasing presence during these visits." "Understood, sir," Raphael said, though his expression carried lingering concern about exactly how significant this emerging threat might become. As Raphael departed to arrange increased security measures, Antonio remained alone in the quiet hallway outside Sophia's room, understanding with growing unease that the peaceful, hopeful routine he'd carefully maintained over the past year was about to face serious, potentially devastating disruption from enemies who had patiently waited for exactly this moment of perceived vulnerability. Over the following 2 weeks, additional security personnel began appearing discreetly throughout St. Mary's Medical Center, positioned carefully to avoid alarming other patients and families, while providing genuine protection around Sophia's pediatric wing. Antonio arranged everything with careful precision, understanding the delicate balance required between adequate protection and maintaining the peaceful, hopeful atmosphere he'd worked to preserve around his daughter's care. Isabella noticed the increased security during her regular visits, watching quietly as unfamiliar but clearly capable men positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the hallway, their presence subtle but unmistakably purposeful to anyone paying close attention. "Is everything all right?" she asked Antonio one evening, genuine concern evident in her voice as she noticed yet another new security presence near the elevator. Antonio hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much to share about the escalating danger without unnecessarily alarming her. "There's been increased tension with a rival organization," he said finally. "I've taken additional precautions to ensure Sophia remains completely safe." "Should I be worried?" Isabella asked directly, appreciating his honesty even as genuine unease built in her chest. "I won't lie to you," Antonio said seriously. "There is some risk, given the circumstances. But I promise you, every possible precaution is being taken to protect both Sophia and you, given your increasing presence during these visits." Isabella absorbed this information carefully, understanding the genuine complexity of becoming entangled, even indirectly, with someone from Antonio's dangerous world. I'm not going to stop visiting, she said firmly. Sophia deserves consistency, and honestly, so do you. I won't abandon this connection simply because it involves some risk. Something profound and grateful flickered across Antonio's expression at her steady declaration. Thank you, he said quietly, though I need you to promise me something in return. If I ever tell you circumstances have become too dangerous, that you need to stay away temporarily, I need you to trust that judgment without argument. I promise, Isabella agreed, though genuine unease lingered beneath her steady reassurance. 3 days later, the situation escalated significantly. Raphael arrived at the hospital during Isabella and Antonio's evening visit, his expression carrying urgent concern that immediately shifted the peaceful atmosphere of Sophia's room. Sir, he said quietly, though his tense posture suggested the matter required immediate, serious attention. We need to speak privately. Antonio glanced apologetically at Isabella before stepping into the hallway with Raphael. Their conversation carried out in low, urgent tones that Isabella couldn't fully hear despite her position near the door. When Antonio returned, his expression had transformed entirely, controlled authority replacing the gentle warmth he typically displayed during his visits with Sophia. Isabella, he said seriously, I need you to leave the hospital immediately with security escort. There's been a direct threat made against this facility. Fear coursed through Isabella's chest at this sudden, urgent development. What kind of threat? The Salazar organization has apparently learned enough about Sophia's condition and your involvement to consider both of you potential leverage against me, Antonio explained rapidly, already moving toward the door to signal additional security. I need you safely away from here while we address the situation directly. What about Sophia? Isabella asked urgently, glancing back toward the peaceful, unaware child still connected to her various monitoring equipment. She's being moved to a more secure location within the hospital immediately, Antonio said, his voice carrying barely controlled urgency. Please, Isabella, I need you to go now, with the security team Raphael will provide. Isabella hesitated only briefly before nodding, understanding the genuine seriousness of the situation despite her instinctive desire to remain near both Antonio and Sophia during this frightening development. Security personnel guided her quickly through a discreet exit, ushering her into a waiting car that immediately pulled away from the hospital's main entrance. Meanwhile, within the hospital, Antonio worked urgently alongside a security team to relocate Sophia to a more protected section of the facility, one specifically designed for high-security medical situations that the hospital administration maintained for exactly these kinds of dangerous circumstances. What exactly do we know about their planned approach? Antonio asked Raphael as they oversaw Sophia's careful, urgent transfer. Limited information, Raphael admitted grimly, but our sources suggest they're planning something significant tonight, potentially believing they can use Sophia's vulnerability to force your surrender or significant territorial concessions. Antonio's expression hardened with fierce, protective determination. That will not happen, he said firmly. Increase security around this new location immediately. I want every available resource focused entirely on Sophia's protection. As medical staff worked carefully to relocate Sophia's extensive equipment and maintain her delicate medical stability during the stressful transfer, Antonio remained close beside her bed, his controlled composure barely containing the fierce protective fury building beneath his careful exterior. I won't let them hurt you, he murmured quietly to his unresponsive daughter as the transfer team worked efficiently around them. Not again. Never again. Across the city, in Isabella's small apartment, she paced anxiously, unable to settle despite the security personnel Antonio had insisted remain stationed discreetly outside her building. Her phone remained clutched tightly in her hand, waiting desperately for any update about the unfolding crisis at the hospital. Around 11 that evening, her phone finally buzzed with an incoming call from Antonio. Are you safe? She asked immediately upon answering. For now, Antonio said, exhaustion and tension evident in his voice. Sophia has been relocated to a more secure area of the hospital. We're monitoring the situation closely, though we haven't identified exactly when or how the Salazar organization intends to make their move. What can I do? Isabella asked, genuine helplessness evident in her voice. Stay exactly where you are with the security I've arranged, Antonio said firmly. I promise to update you as soon as I have more concrete information. The call ended, leaving Isabella alone with her anxious thoughts, genuine fear building steadily as she contemplated the danger now surrounding both Antonio and his vulnerable, unresponsive daughter. Back at the hospital, tension continued building throughout the following hours as Antonio's security team worked to identify and neutralize the exact nature of the Salazar organization's planned threat. Reports gradually filtered in suggesting a coordinated approach targeting multiple hospital entrances simultaneously, an ambitious, dangerous plan clearly designed to overwhelm standard security measures through sheer coordinated aggression. They're planning to move within the hour, Raphael reported urgently, studying updated intelligence on his tablet. Multiple teams coordinated timing, clearly intending to breach security and reach Sophia's location directly. Antonio's expression turned fiercely determined, every trace of his earlier gentle vulnerability, with Sophia replaced entirely by the calculating, dangerous authority that had built and successfully defended his criminal empire for years. Then we ensure they find considerably more resistance than they anticipated, he said firmly, already moving to coordinate his own security response with grim, focused determination. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Antonio had built, both his dangerous criminal empire and the fragile, hopeful new connection he discovered with Isabella, against enemies willing to threaten an innocent, vulnerable child to achieve their ambitious territorial goals. The Salazar organization's assault began just after midnight, coordinated teams attempting to breach the hospital's east and west entrances simultaneously, while a third group approached through the underground parking structure. Antonio's security forces, forewarned and carefully positioned, met each incursion with disciplined, controlled resistance. Antonio remained close beside Sophia's secure room throughout the escalating chaos, refusing to leave despite Raphael's urgent suggestions that he retreat to a safer command position elsewhere in the building. I will not leave her, Antonio said firmly, his voice carrying absolute, unwavering determination. Whatever happens tonight, I remain exactly here. Gunfire echoed distantly through the hospital's lower floors as security teams clashed with the invading Salazar forces. Antonio's men, better positioned and genuinely motivated by loyalty rather than simple payment, gradually gained control of each breach point, though the coordinated nature of the attack meant the confrontation stretched tensely across nearly 20 minutes before the immediate threat began showing signs of collapse. Isabella, still confined to her apartment under security protection, received updates through anxious, sporadic phone calls from Raphael, who had been instructed to keep her informed given her genuine, growing connection to the unfolding crisis. They're being pushed back, Raphael reported during one such call, tension still evident in his voice despite the apparently positive development. Antonio's forces have secured the east and west entrances. The parking structure team is still engaged, but losing ground rapidly. Is Sophia safe? Isabella asked urgently, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her phone. For now, Raphael confirmed. Antonio hasn't left her side throughout the entire confrontation. As the Salazar organization's coordinated assault gradually collapsed under the weight of Antonio's superior preparation and positioning, a different, unexpected crisis began unfolding within Sophia's secure room. The stress and commotion surrounding the ongoing conflict, despite careful efforts to shield her from direct exposure, had apparently affected Sophia's already fragile medical condition. Monitoring equipment began registering concerning fluctuations in her vital signs, alerts sounding urgently as medical staff rushed to assess the sudden, alarming development. What's happening? Antonio demanded, his controlled composure finally cracking as he watched medical personnel work urgently around his daughter's bed. Her heart rate has become dangerously irregular, the attending physician explained rapidly, already directing nursing staff toward emergency interventions. The stress of tonight's events may have triggered this cardiac complication. We need to stabilize her immediately. Antonio watched in helpless, agonized silence as medical staff worked with urgent efficiency around his daughter, years of careful, hopeful vigils suddenly threatened by circumstances entirely beyond his control despite his fears, protective efforts to shield her from exactly this kind of danger. Please, he said quietly, his voice breaking with raw, desperate emotion as he watched the medical team's urgent efforts. Please, not like this. Not because of me. Not because of my world reaching her again. The medical team worked with focus, practiced efficiency, administering careful medication, and closely monitoring Sophia's response as her irregular heart rhythm gradually, mercifully began stabilizing under their attentive care. She's stabilizing, the physician finally reported, visible relief evident in her exhausted expression. The immediate crisis has passed, though we'll need to monitor her closely for the next several hours to ensure this doesn't recur. Antonio sank into the chair beside Sophia's bed, overwhelming relief and lingering, raw fear combining into something he could barely process after the terrifying uncertainty of the past several minutes. Meanwhile, throughout the hospital, Antonio's security forces had successfully neutralized the Salazar organization's coordinated assault, capturing several of the invading force, while others retreated in disorganized chaos once their carefully planned attack collapsed under unexpected, disciplined resistance. Raphael arrived at Sophia's room shortly after the immediate crisis, both regarding the security breach and Sophia's cardiac complication, had passed. "Sir," he reported quietly, "the attack has been fully repelled. We've captured 3 of their operatives, and the rest have withdrawn entirely." Antonio nodded, though his exhausted attention remained fixed on his daughter's now stable but still fragile condition. "Good," he said quietly. "Find out everything possible from our captives about who ordered this attack and why they believe tonight represented an opportunity." "Already underway," Raphael confirmed. As the immediate danger finally, genuinely passed, Antonio allowed himself a rare moment of complete emotional vulnerability, resting his head gently against Sophia's small hand, tears he carefully controlled throughout the terrifying evening finally beginning to fall freely. "I'm so sorry, Mija," he whispered softly. "I promise you, whatever it takes, I will end this threat permanently. You will never face this kind of danger again because of the world I've built." Across the city, Isabella finally received word from Raphael that the immediate crisis had passed. Both the security breach and Sophia's frightening medical complication successfully resolved despite the terrifying uncertainty of the preceding hours. "Can I come to the hospital?" she asked immediately, genuine need to see both Antonio and Sophia evident in her urgent request. Raphael hesitated only briefly before confirming security had been sufficiently restored to allow her safe return. Within 30 minutes, Isabella arrived at the hospital, moving quickly through corridors still showing subtle signs of the recent conflict, security personnel more numerous and visibly alert than during her previous visits. She found Antonio still seated beside Sophia's bed, exhaustion and raw emotion evident in his posture, despite his attempts to maintain some semblance of his usual controlled composure. "Antonio," she said softly, moving quickly to his side. He looked up, genuine relief evident in his expression at her safe arrival. "You shouldn't have come," he said, though his tone carried more gratitude than actual reproach. "It's still not entirely safe. I needed to see you both," Isabella said firmly, settling into the chair beside him, her hand finding his in a gesture of genuine comfort and support. "How is she?" "Stable," Antonio said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "For now. But tonight reminded me exactly how fragile that stability truly remains, how close I came to losing her entirely because of the dangerous world I built." Isabella squeezed his hand gently, offering silent support as he processed the terrifying events of the evening. "She's still here," she said softly, "fighting, just like she has been for the past year. Tonight didn't change that." "It could have," Antonio said, his voice carrying raw, unfiltered anguish. "So easily, it could have ended everything tonight, and I would have been responsible entirely, just as I was responsible for the original accident that brought her here." "You protected her," Isabella said firmly, meeting his exhausted, grief-stricken eyes directly. "Tonight, you and your people successfully protected her from a genuine, serious threat. That matters, Antonio. That counts for something significant." Antonio studied her carefully, something shifting gradually in his exhausted expression as her words slowly penetrated the raw guilt and fear still consuming him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for understanding, for not running from everything this terrifying night revealed about the genuine danger surrounding my world." "I told you before," Isabella said gently. I'm not going anywhere, not because of danger, not because of fear. Sophia needs consistency, and honestly, so do you. As dawn's first light began filtering through the hospital windows, Sophia's condition remained stable, the immediate crisis fully resolved despite the terrifying uncertainty of the preceding night. Antonio and Isabella remained together beside her bed. Their bond deepened significantly through the shared trauma and relief of the dangerous night they'd successfully survived together. In the weeks following the Salazar organization's failed assault, Antonio worked methodically to eliminate the threat entirely, using information gathered from captured operatives to trace the attack directly back to its source. Within a month, the Salazar organization's leadership had been forced into a permanent, binding truce, their ambitious territorial gambit having cost them significantly more than they had ever hoped to gain. With the external danger finally genuinely resolved, Antonio found himself able to focus more completely on Sophia's ongoing care, his daily visits continuing with the same devoted consistency that had first caught Isabella's curious attention so many months earlier, though now Isabella joined him for the vast majority of these visits, their bond having deepened significantly through everything they'd shared together. Life settled into a new, gentler rhythm. Antonio began spending less time managing the more dangerous aspect of his organization directly, instead delegating increasing responsibility to trusted lieutenants, while he focused more completely on Sophia's care and his growing relationship with Isabella. "You've changed," Raphael observed one afternoon, watching Antonio prepare to leave for his daily hospital visit with obvious anticipation rather than the grim determination that had once characterized these routines. "Perhaps," Antonio acknowledged, something genuinely lighter evident in his expression despite the ongoing uncertainty surrounding Sophia's condition. "I've realized recently that the constant vigilance and control I once believed necessary for survival in this world doesn't actually preclude genuine happiness, genuine connection. Isabella's good for you," Raphael said simply. "She is," Antonio agreed, genuine warmth evident in his voice. At the hospital, Isabella had become a familiar, welcome presence throughout Sophia's pediatric wing, the nursing staff greeting her warmly whenever she arrived, often before Antonio himself completed his daily business obligations. She had taken to reading aloud to Sophia during these solo visits, working through a stack of children's books that Antonio had mentioned were among his daughter's favorites before the accident. One particular Thursday afternoon, nearly 2 months after the Salazar organization's failed attack, Isabella sat beside Sophia's bed reading a favorite fairy tale, her voice carrying the same warm, comforting tone she used with customers throughout her bakery. She had just reached a particularly exciting section of the story when she noticed something that made her breath catch entirely. Sophia's fingers, resting motionless on the blanket throughout months of unchanging stillness, moved slightly. Isabella froze, uncertain if she genuinely witnessed movement or simply imagined it given her constant, hopeful attention to any possible sign of improvement. She continued reading, watching carefully, and moments later witnessed the movement again, unmistakable this time, Sophia's small fingers curling slightly against the blanket's soft fabric. "Sophia?" Isabella said softly, setting aside the book immediately, her heart pounding with cautious, desperate hope. "Sophia, can you hear me?" She pressed the call button urgently, alerting nursing staff, while continuing to speak softly and encouragingly to the child whose fingers continued their small, deliberate movement. Within minutes, medical staff filled the room, careful, methodical assessment beginning immediately as they checked Sophia's responsiveness to various stimuli. Isabella called Antonio immediately, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion as she relayed the extraordinary development. "Come now," she said urgently. "Please, Antonio, come now. I think she might be waking up." Antonio arrived at the hospital in record time, rushing through corridors with an urgency that hadn't been necessary since the dangerous night of the Salazar organization's assault months earlier. He found Isabella waiting anxiously outside Sophia's room, medical staff still conducting careful assessment within. "What's happening?" he demanded, though genuine, desperate hope was evident beneath his urgent tone. "Her fingers moved," Isabella explained quickly, deliberately, responding to my voice. "I'm certain of it. The doctors are assessing her now." They waited together in tense, hopeful silence until the attending physician finally emerged, her expression carrying cautious but genuine optimism. Mr. Reyes, she said carefully, Sophia is showing clear signs of increased neurological responsiveness. It's still early, and full recovery from this kind of extended coma requires considerable time and careful monitoring. But her brain activity has increased significantly, and she's responding to verbal stimuli in ways we haven't observed since her admission. Is she waking up? Antonio asked, his voice raw with barely contained emotion. We believe so, the physician confirmed. The process may take days or even weeks to fully complete, but the signs are genuinely encouraging. Antonio's controlled composure finally broke entirely, tears streaming freely down his face as he processed this extraordinary, long-hoped-for news. He turned to Isabella, pulling her into a fierce, grateful embrace. You did this, he said, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. Your voice, your presence, reading to her every day. This is because of you. This is because of your unwavering love and devotion, Isabella corrected gently, though genuine joy filled her voice as well. I simply had the privilege of being present for this miracle. Over the following 2 weeks, Sophia's recovery progressed steadily, her eyes eventually opening fully, her voice returning gradually as she slowly reoriented herself to a world she hadn't consciously experienced in over a year. The transition remained challenging. Considerable physical therapy and careful medical monitoring required as her body adjusted to functioning again after such an extended period of unconsciousness. But she was awake. She was, against significant odds, genuinely, miraculously recovering. On the day Sophia was finally deemed stable enough for a brief, careful conversation, Isabella brought a fresh strawberry cream cake to the hospital, the same recipe Antonio had faithfully purchased every single day throughout his daughter's long, uncertain coma. Papa says you make the cake he always brings me, Sophia said softly, her voice still weak but genuinely curious as Isabella carefully set the cake within easy reach. I do, Isabella confirmed, smiling warmly at the young girl whose recovery had brought such profound joy into both her and Antonio's lives. Your papa told me it's your favorite. It is, Sophia confirmed, a small, genuine smile crossing her face for the first time since her extraordinary awakening. He brought it every day, didn't he? Even though I couldn't eat it? Every single day, Isabella confirmed gently. He never stopped believing you would wake up eventually. Sophia looked toward her father, genuine love and gratitude evident in her weakened but increasingly alert expression. Thank you, Papa, she said softly, for never giving up on me. Antonio, overwhelmed with emotion he could no longer attempt to control, moved closer to his daughter's bedside, gently taking her hand in his own. I will never stop believing in you, Mija. Never. 6 months later, Sophia had recovered sufficiently to return home, her physical therapy continuing steadily as she rebuilt strength and coordination lost during her extended coma, but her recovery progressing remarkably well according to her medical team's careful, ongoing assessment. Antonio had continued restructuring significant portions of his organization toward legitimate business interests, understanding clearly now the genuine cost his dangerous world had nearly extracted from his beloved daughter, determined to build a safer, more stable future for her ongoing recovery and continued happiness. Isabella had become a permanent, cherished presence throughout their lives, her relationship with Antonio deepening steadily into something genuine and lasting, built through shared adversity, hope, and the profound joy of witnessing Sophia's miraculous recovery together. On a warm afternoon nearly a year after Isabella had first followed Antonio's mysterious daily routine to its heartbreaking origin, the three of them sat together in Isabella's bakery, Sophia carefully decorating cupcakes under Isabella's patient guidance, while Antonio watched with quiet, profound contentment. I never imagined, Antonio said softly, watching his daughter's genuine, joyful laughter as she accidentally smeared frosting across her nose, that following that daily cake purchase would eventually lead to this, to genuine happiness, genuine family, after everything we survived together. Isabella smiled warmly, watching Sophia's continued recovery with profound gratitude. Sometimes, she said softly, the most meaningful connections arrive from the most unexpected, heartbreaking beginnings. I'm simply grateful I followed my curiosity that day, rather than letting fear keep me from discovering the truth. Sophia looked up from her cupcake decoration, genuine joy evident in her recovering, increasingly vibrant expression. I'm glad you followed Papa that day, too, she said simply, before returning her focused attention to her frosting. Unaware of the profound significance her simple words carried for both adults watching her with such overwhelming love and gratitude. Some connections, Isabella reflected, watching her unexpected, beloved family with genuine, complete happiness, truly did begin with heartbreak, only to bloom eventually into something far more beautiful and lasting than anyone could have originally imagined.